The skyline behind the studio shimmered with morning light, casting a golden hue across the set. Cameras stood poised. Crew members whispered into headsets. The air buzzed with the usual energy of live television. But Mike Tyson sat unusually still in the center of it all, calm, slightly withdrawn. Wearing a tailored suit that did little to conceal the years etched into his frame, he looked every bit the former champion. A legend, sitting in silence, waiting. He had been here before. Interviews, press tours, the carefully controlled public appearances. None of it was new. He had come to speak about his new memoir, a searing recounting of violence and survival, and the upcoming Netflix documentary that promised to show a side of him few had truly understood. The stage was set for routine, but something in the air felt different, like a string pulled too tight, about to snap. The host leaned forward, smiling, but her voice held a tone of hesitation. "Mike, you've seen it all. But we have something today that you probably didn't expect." He cocked his head slightly. "What's that?" A cream-colored envelope was handed to the host by a producer, its surface embossed with gold ink, its seal an unfamiliar emblem. She took it carefully, almost ceremonially. "This letter arrived last night," she said, glancing up at him. "It's from West Africa, from the president of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré. It's addressed to you personally. He gave us permission to read it aloud. If you're okay with that." Mike's expression didn't change at first, but his posture shifted ever so slightly. His eyes, sharp even in their wariness, narrowed. Then he nodded once, slowly. "Go ahead." The studio fell into a silence so deep you could hear the hum of the overhead lights. The host unfolded the letter. "Dear Mr. Tyson," she began, her voice soft, deliberate. "My name is Ibrahim Traoré, President of the Transition of Burkina Faso. I do not write to you as a politician. I write to you as a boy who once had nothing and saw you fight on a flickering television in a crowded room." Mike's face twitched. Just slightly. His eyes didn't blink. "You were not just a boxer," she continued. "You were proof. Proof that pain could be turned into power. That a boy from nowhere could stand before giants and make them fall." His breath changed. It was subtle, but it changed. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, staring at the host as if trying to read the letter from her lips. "When my country was hurting," she read, "I remembered your eyes in the ring. Not your fists, your eyes, the pain, the fire, the refusal to be broken. And now I try to lead my people with that same fire." Something in Mike shifted. His eyes glassed. His jaw opened just a fraction. His hands, once balled loosely on his lap, began to tremble. "Thank you, Mike Tyson," the host read, barely above a whisper now, "for teaching me to rise. Not as a fighter, but as a man." Mike turned his head, quickly. His voice cracked. "Stop," he said. "Just stop for a second." But it was too late. Something had cracked open. His chest heaved once, shallow, as if he were trying to hold it back. But the dam had broken. Tears welled in his eyes, then fell. Slow at first, then heavy. His lips twitched, trying to smile, trying to hold the armor in place. But it was gone. The mask was gone. "He saw me," Mike whispered, staring down at the floor. "Not the knockouts. Not the fame. Just me." He wiped at his face with his palm, the motion rough, unpracticed. His breath hitched. "I was 14, homeless, angry. I wanted to die back then," he said, the words tumbling from his mouth without filter. Nobody knew. Nobody cared. The audience in the studio gasped softly. No one moved. The cameras didn't cut away. The silence was absolute. "I fought," he said, "'cause it was the only way anyone looked at me." Then he looked up. Into the camera. His eyes were red, his cheeks streaked with tears. But to know that halfway across the world, someone watched me, and became something. A president. His voice broke entirely. And with it all pretense. The man who had once made opponents crumble with a single punch was now trembling, unraveling, exposing the boy beneath the myth. No one dared speak. No one dared move. The host gently placed the letter on the table in front of him. Mike's hands rested near it, fingers twitching slightly. He stared at it like it held something sacred. And then, he said nothing. He just wept. What had begun as an interview had become something entirely different. The former heavyweight champion of the world, the once terrifying Iron Mike, was not selling a book or promoting a documentary. He was being seen, really seen. Not as a fighter, not as a showman, but as a man, a boy, a soul. The boy who had once fought because it was all he had now, unknowingly, helped another boy believe he could lead. From pain came purpose, from punches came peace, and from a letter, healing. The studio cut to commercial eventually, but even then, the silence lingered. Mike sat in the same spot, still wiping tears from his face. His shoulders had softened, his hands no longer shook, though they hovered protectively near the letter as if shielding it. The host leaned in, her voice gentle. "Do you want to continue?" Mike nodded. "Yeah, the world needs to hear this." The cameras came back on. This time there was no script, no PR strategy, no well-timed banter, only truth. "Ibrahim Traoré," Mike said, his voice thick with emotion. "I never met you, but I feel like I know you." He picked up the letter, held it to his chest, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. It was supposed to be routine. Another morning show interview on another polished studio set, with city lights twinkling in the background and coffee mugs on the table, barely touched. The producers had promised a warm conversation, a mix of reflection and promotion. They would ask about the new memoir, the documentary coming to Netflix, his past, and perhaps a glimpse of the future. And Mike Tyson, the former undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, the feared, baddest man on the planet, came prepared. He wore a tailored charcoal suit with a muted pocket square, the faintest tremble of silver in his beard betraying the years that had passed since he first danced under the spotlight. His eyes, though tired, still carried that unmistakable intensity, the look of someone who had fought battles long before he ever stepped into a ring. He looked like a man who had mastered his chaos. But what happened that morning, no one was ready for that. The host leaned forward with a soft, unreadable smile. There was something different in her tone, not excitement, not curiosity. Reverence, perhaps? Respect. "Mike, you've seen it all," she said, her voice low, careful, like she was approaching a sacred space. "But today we have something you didn't expect." Mike tilted his head, his brow furrowed. "What's that?" She held up an envelope, cream-colored with gold lettering and an unfamiliar seal. "This arrived last night, from Burkina Faso. It's a personal letter from President Ibrahim Traoré. He addressed it only to you, but he agreed we could read it aloud. If that's okay." The studio shifted. The crew stilled. The audience stopped murmuring. Something ancient stirred in the air, and Mike, who had stood toe to toe with monsters and shadows, tensed slightly.
He nodded. "Go ahead."
The host carefully unfolded the letter, her voice, steady but soft, carried across the silent room. "Dear Mr. Tyson," she read, "my name is Ibrahim Traoré, President of the Transition of Burkina Faso. I do not write to you as a politician. I write as a boy who once had nothing and saw you fight on a flickering television screen in a crowded room." Mike inhaled sharply. His breathing changed. "Not obvious, but not hidden. You were not just a boxer." The letter continued. "You were proof. Proof that pain could become power. That a boy from nowhere could stand before giants and make them fall." Mike's lips parted, but he said nothing. His eyes were fixed on the floor, his fists loosely clenched on his thighs. The host read on, slower now. "When my country was hurting, I remembered your eyes in the ring, not your fists, your eyes. The pain, the fire, the refusal to be broken. I try to lead my people with that same fire." Silence filled the space like thunder. "Thank you, Mike Tyson, for teaching me to rise, not as a fighter but as a man." That was when it happened. Mike turned his head, as if trying to shake it off. His lips moved, barely audible. "Stop, just stop a second." But it was already too late. His chest heaved once, then again the armor cracked. The room dissolved around him. The mask shattered. Tears formed. At first they lingered on the edge of his lashes, fighting not to fall. But then they came slow, heavy, relentless. His lips trembled. His body shook. "He saw me," he whispered. "Not the knockouts. Not the money. Just me." The host gently placed the letter on the table. "I wasn't supposed to survive my youth," Mike said suddenly, his voice raw. "I was a thief. A fighter. I was locked up before I ever knew love." He looked around the room, at the cameras, at the lights, at the stunned crew, and saw none of it. He was somewhere else. This man, this president, he saw strength in my suffering. He paused, his breath catching in his throat. "Nobody talks about the hunger. The nights you pray not to wake up. But this letter, it told me I wasn't alone. In that studio, something sacred had happened. A place once filled with branding and banter had become a chapel. A former fighter's tears had become another man's message. And now the world was listening. That same night, half a world away, in a quiet government office in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré sat alone. His office was modest. No gold trim, no grand portraits. A fan buzzed overhead. Outside, his security detail stood at ease, having learned to give him space at times like this. He was watching the interview live. And when Mike cried, when that moment broke across the screen, Ibrahim's own eyes welled with tears. He bowed his head slightly, whispered in French, "Il a senti, vraiment." He felt it truly. Behind him the walls bore no images of wealth or power, just pictures of children in dusty classrooms, farmers in cracked earth, nurses holding infants, soldiers in mud, stained boots, his people. And beside those portraits, near a sun-faded flag, stood a small, framed photo. It was Mike Tyson, young, shirtless, eyes burning, fists clenched. It had been clipped from a magazine decades ago and kept ever since. It had never been about boxing. It had always been about the spirit. An assistant knocked once, then entered with an update. "The UN saw the interview," he said. "They want to reopen talks on your education reforms." Ibrahim nodded. "Let them wait. Tonight, the world doesn't need politics." He turned back to the screen. Tonight, it needs truth. By morning in New York, the interview had gone viral. Clips of Tyson, tears falling as he read Ibrahim's letter, exploded across social media. Headlines screamed the champ breaks down. But it was more than viral fodder. It was something real. Celebrities shared it. Teachers played it in classrooms. Community centers in the Bronx played it on loop. Refugee camps in Mali and Chad watched it on cell phones pass from hand to hand. Because it wasn't about fame. It was about being seen. And just past midnight, Mike's phone rang. Unknown number, international code. He stared at it, then answered. "Hello." A calm, deep voice responded. "Mr. Tyson, this is Ibrahim Traoré." Mike froze. You're the guy from the letter." "Yes," Ibrahim said. "And you're the man who taught me how to survive when I was a boy with no shoes. You didn't know me, but I knew you." Mike's throat tightened. They didn't speak like leaders or icons. They spoke like survivors. "Thank you," Mike whispered. "No," Ibrahim replied. "Thank you. You gave me the courage to stand up when the world told me to kneel." Silence. Then, "Mike," he said gently, "would you come to Burkina Faso?" Mike blinked. "What for?" "Not for a fight. For hope." And in that moment, two men from opposite worlds, scarred by different wars, found a bridge, through pain, through struggle, through truth. Something extraordinary had just begun. Mike didn't sleep. He sat alone in his apartment, staring at the letter, reading it again and again. The words weren't fancy. There were no poetic flourishes. Just truth. One line echoed in his head. "When I was 13, I fought not with gloves, but with hunger." That was his life too. He remembered Brooklyn, stealing bread, dodging cops, getting locked up before he could grow up. Nobody saw a future in him, except for one man, one trainer, who believed when no one else did. Just like Ibrahim. The next morning his team came in. Publicists, trainers, brand reps. They laid out the day's schedule: photo shoots, podcast interviews, brand meetings. Mike looked at them, then tore it up. "I'm flying to Burkina Faso." They stared. "Mikey, are you sure?" He nodded. "It's not about boxing anymore. It's about the kid I was, and the boy he still is." 2 days later, Mike Tyson arrived in Ouagadougou. No red carpets, no paparazzi, no glittering stages, just sun, dust, and faces. Real people. Children ran barefoot alongside the convoy, shouting, "Mike Tyson!" Mike Tyson, he waved. But his heart was somewhere else. At the gates of a modest government house, President Traoré stood waiting. No media, no rehearsed lines, just a handshake that lasted longer than expected. And for a moment, there were no cameras, no world watching. Just two men. They didn't talk politics. They talked pain. They talked hunger. They talked survival. And they talked about what comes next. Not for them, but for the next boy, the next girl. Watching from a crowded room, on a flickering screen, they sat in silence. The president and the boxer. Two men on a quiet rooftop in Ouagadougou, the capital of a country most of the world couldn't spell, let alone find on a map. Above them, the stars shimmered like old stories, faint, but burning. Below them, the soft golden lights of Burkina Faso flickered, humming with life. Mike Tyson leaned back in his chair, staring out into the dusty horizon. There were no microphones, no cameras, no PR teams. Just him, President Ibrahim Traoré, and the gentle sound of the wind moving through the trees like a whisper from childhood. I forgot what quiet feels like, Mike muttered. Traoré smiled. Quiet is rare for men like us. Mike looked at him. Yeah, especially the kind that heals. They didn't talk business, they talked pain. Earlier that day, Traoré had taken Mike to a rural school outside the capital. The walls were chipped and sun-bleached. Some windows had no glass, and the chalkboards were cracked. But the laughter, it echoed like music through broken bricks. Joy, raw and unfiltered, lived there. A boy sat alone near the back, rubbing a swollen eye. When Mike walked in, surrounded by cautious adults and curious kids, the boy didn't flinch. His body stiffened, his gaze fixed. Mike didn't ask permission. He sat down on the floor beside the boy, knees creaking. "You fight?" he asked gently. The boy hesitated, then nodded once. Mike nodded too. "Me too," he whispered. "But you know the strongest punch." The boy looked up, intrigued. "It's the one you don't throw." The words hung in the dusty air like gospel. For a moment, the boy said nothing. Then Mike took off his heavy championship ring, gold encrusted with diamonds, a symbol of blood and glory, and handed it to the boy. "Hold this for a second." The boy's hands trembled as he took it, cradling it like something sacred. And just then, President Traoré knelt beside them. "In this country," he said softly, "you are not your scars, you are your spirit." The boy began to cry. So did Mike. Later that night, up on the rooftop, Traoré handed Mike a worn wooden box, no inscription, no lock. Just a box filled with paper, folded notes, dry-on scrawled thoughts. "They heard about the letter I sent you," he explained, "and now they wrote to you." Mike stared, stunned. "All these for me?" Traoré nodded. "Children, from villages, cities, camps. Some walked miles to dictate their words to teachers. Some don't have shoes, Mike, but they had something to say to the man who once survived the fire." Mike reached inside. The first letter was printed in large, shaky handwriting. "Dear Mike Tyson, you are a lion who made it through fire. Please don't forget us." The second, "My papa died fighting to protect our village. But now I believe I can be strong like you." He read them slowly. Tears fell, one by one. He didn't wipe them away. He let them fall. He clutched the letters to his chest like they were championship belts. "These," he whispered, voice trembling, "these are worth more than anything I ever won." President Traoré placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Now you see, brother," he said. "Pain connects us more than fame ever could." There was no sound but the wind brushing the edges of the letters. In that moment, something was sealed. Not a deal, not an agreement. A bond. Forged not through politics or power, but between two broken boys who had once wondered if they were worth saving. Mike reached for the last letter. It was folded unevenly and written on torn notebook paper. The ink had bled in some places. "Dear Mr. Tyson, my name is Matty. I am 11 years old. My father was a soldier. He said your fights gave him courage. He died last year. Now I try to be brave. I heard you cry. That means even lions cry. So maybe I can cry too." Mike's hands shook. His throat closed. He remembered being 11, Brooklyn, the sirens, his mother sick and fading, the empty kitchen, the boys on the corner waiting to turn him into someone cold, and how he had cried only once that year, then swore never to do it again. But here, now, under the African stars, something broke. He whispered to no one in particular, "Even lions cry." Traoré looked at him with deep, quiet understanding. "That boy Matty," he said gently. "He lives nearby. Would you like to meet him?" Mike didn't speak. He just nodded. ChatGPT said he. The studio was still. The lights cast a soft glow across the set, but it wasn't the heat of the ring or the rush of the crowd that Mike Tyson had known all his life. It was quiet. A different kind of intensity. Across from him, the host tried to keep things light, cracking a joke about Mike's recent trip to Africa. Something about starting a new fight club. The audience chuckled politely. Mike smiled faintly, almost out of habit, but there was a weight in his chest that didn't lift with the laughter. He looked down at the letter in his hand. His fingers trembled slightly, not with nerves, memory, loss, truth. "Actually," he said softly, "I was being healed by an 11-year-old boy." The laughter died instantly. The room shifted. The host's grin faded into something quieter, almost reverent. Mike's voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried the kind of gravity that makes people lean in without realizing it. "I met kids who've lost everything, their homes, their parents, their futures. And yet, they have more heart than most champions I've ever seen. He lifted his gaze to the camera, not blinking. Ibrahim Traoré, he said, thank you. You reminded me that real strength isn't fists, it's love. There wasn't a dry eye in the studio. Not among the crew, not among the audience. Even behind screens across the world, people stopped what they were doing and simply listened. Some cried. Some smiled. But all of them felt something they hadn't touched in a long time. Hope. The next morning, the phone rang in Mike's Brooklyn apartment. Early. The kind of early where even the city hasn't quite stretched its limbs. He didn't recognize the number. For a moment, he hovered his thumb over the red button. But something instinctual, something in the gut, made him answer. Mike Tyson, he said. A warm voice, calm and full of quiet strength, replied, yes. This is Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso. Mike blinked. For a moment he didn't speak. Then the president continued. I saw what you did for me. You didn't just honor his father. You healed something in him. And in you. Mike felt the knot in his throat return. It was a strange kind of vulnerability, one he wasn't used to. He'd spent a lifetime being hard, unbreakable. And now, he was learning that healing sometimes looks like letting the cracks show. Traoré's voice was gentle but sure. I want to invite you back, Mike, but this time not just for one boy. For a nation. I want you to speak to our youth. Tell them your story. Show them what rising from nothing looks like. Mike exhaled, his voice rough. You don't know what that means to me, brother. I do, Traoré said simply. Within 48 hours, Mike was back on a plane. This time it wasn't about boxing. It wasn't about brands or networks or cameras. It was about redemption. It was about the power of scars, not to shame, but to speak. This time, he wasn't fighting for himself. He was fighting for something far bigger. When he arrived in Ouagadougou, there were no red carpets, no press lines, no paparazzi, just dust, sun, and a crowd of wide-eyed children who couldn't believe the man from their scrapbooks was walking toward them in real life. The schoolyard was packed. Hundreds of children sitting in rows on the dry ground. Some had notebooks. Others clutched wrinkled black and white photos of a younger Mike, fists raised, eyes full of fire. Mike didn't walk in like a star. He walked in like someone who knew what it was to be invisible. He sat on a plain chair. There was no stage, no microphone. Just him and a translator. He began slowly, the words forming like bricks laid carefully by someone rebuilding something long broken. I used to think I was just a weapon, he said. I thought if I hit hard enough, I could make the pain stop. I didn't know I had a heart. Not until I listened to a child. He told them about Maddie, about his own mother, who died when he was young, about stealing food because no one was feeding him, about going to prison before he even knew what love felt like, about the first man who ever believed in him, Customado, about how he learned to fight before he ever learned to cry. Some of the boys tried to sit still, to look tough. But the words cracked something in them, not just because it was Mike Tyson saying them, but because they recognized the feeling of being small and scared and angry at the world. They saw themselves in him. Mike stood up. He walked into the crowd through the kids sitting quietly and pointed at a boy in the third row. You think no one sees you. But I do. You're strong, even when you feel broken. The boy's lip quivered. He looked down, and then he cried, and then another boy cried, and another, a chain reaction of emotion long buried. At the back, President Traoré stood with his arms folded, his eyes wet. This wasn't a speech. It was a revolution of the heart. That night, Mike and the president sat under the stars. No cameras, no reporters. Just two men with heavy pasts and newly opened futures. For a while, they didn't talk, just watched the night sky. Why did you write that letter? Mike asked finally, his voice low. Because I saw the boy behind the fighter, Traoré replied. And I believed the world still needed him. Mike couldn't respond. His throat closed. The silence between them was enough. And then Traoré added, You remind my people that strength isn't about fists. It's about rising again and again after life knocks you down. Mike nodded slowly. That's all I ever tried to do. They clasped hands. Not like diplomats, not like strangers, like brothers, like two men who had bled in different ways but survived the same storm. The next morning, photos of Mike at the school began to surface online. But they didn't go viral because of celebrity. They went viral because of truth. Because people saw him holding a crying boy, telling him he mattered. Because people saw a man unafraid of his pain. Because they saw what scars could become when shared. Mike Tyson left Burkina Faso not just as a boxing legend, but as a healer, as a man who had finally stopped running from his own ghosts. And Ibrahim Traoré, the world saw him too, not just as a politician, but as a leader of hearts. Back in New York, Mike returned to the same studio. The crew greeted him differently this time. No jokes, no cheap intros, just a quiet nod of respect. As the cameras rolled again, he held Maddie's letter in his hands, its paper creased and frayed. He read it aloud. Even lions cry. And this time, when he cried, he didn't wipe away the tears. He let them fall. Everything began where it all started, back in the same studio that once froze in silence. The host invited Mike Tyson again, this time for a follow-up interview. It had been months since his trip to Burkina Faso, and the producers were hoping for closure. Maybe some smiles, safe talk about charity work, a few nice words about world peace. They expected polite applause. What they got was silence. The lights dimmed slightly, not by design, but as if the room itself understood the gravity of the moment. Mike walked in slower than before. There was a new stillness in him. Not heavy, not broken, just present. His face carried time differently now. The scars were still there, but they had softened. His hands, once weapons, now trembled as he folded them in his lap. The host leaned forward, more cautious this time. "Mike, what changed you the most in Burkina Faso?" Mike didn't rush the answer. He turned, not to the host, but to the camera. Looking directly into it, he whispered, "A child, and a president." Then, from the inside pocket of his coat, he pulled out a small piece of paper, folded carefully, corners worn soft, a drawing. It was from me, the boy from the village. The drawing was simple, Mike holding the boy's hand, and just behind them, Ibrahim Traoré, smiling. Childlike lines, colors barely inside the edges, but it said everything. The room fell still. Even the cameras seemed to stop breathing. Mike swallowed hard. He doesn't want to fight anymore, he said, his voice catching. He just wants to grow. No one moved. The host, usually ready with quick transitions or warm commentary, sat speechless. Mike continued, "That boy gave me peace." His voice broke. "And Traoré, he gave me purpose." A tear fell. Mike didn't brush it away. He let it land. For the first time, the world didn't see a fighter. They didn't see Iron Mike, the youngest heavyweight champion in history, the feared brawler from Brooklyn. They saw a man in the middle of healing, a man no longer running from his pain, but learning to live alongside it. After the show, Mike sat alone in his dressing room. The silence lingered, like something sacred had just happened. A young staff member knocked softly and stepped inside, holding a brown envelope. "This just arrived. International mail." Mike took it slowly, carefully opening the envelope as though it might disappear. Inside was a handwritten letter. The handwriting was familiar, the words even more so. "My brother Mike," it read. "They call me a president, but I am just a man who dreams of healing, dreams of peace. Your visit reminded us that pain is not the end. It is a beginning, if we dare to feel it, not fight it. Burkina Faso thanks you. I thank you." And the boy, he now sleeps peacefully. Mike stared at the letter, reading each line again, slower the second time. Then he held it to his chest. For the first time in years, he whispered a prayer, not for himself, not for fame or forgiveness, for every broken kid in the world, for every man who had learned to armor his soul just to survive, and for every leader with the courage to love. He closed his eyes, the letter pressed to his heart. "I was never the baddest man on the planet," he whispered. "I was just a boy, waiting to be heard." And finally, someone had listened. A week passed. That's all it took to turn pain into purpose. Mike Tyson stood on a small balcony in Harlem, overlooking a playground turned into an improvised boxing ring. A group of kids, 10, maybe 15 years old, were sparring below. He wasn't their coach. He hadn't come with an entourage or to launch a program. He was just there, present. One boy tripped and hit the ground hard. His friends laughed nervously, unsure whether to help or make a joke. Before they could decide, Mike was already walking down. He didn't say much. Just helped the boy up, looked him in the eyes, and said, "Every fall teaches you how to rise." The boy nodded, holding back tears. But this time for a different reason. The fall hadn't defeated him. It had introduced him to something new, resilience, kindness, being seen. Mike's phone buzzed. He glanced down at the screen. A photo had come in from Burkina Faso. Me was smiling, standing beside a new boxing gym. Painted across the wall, in bold white letters, Tyson Hope Center. Underneath, a plaque, Sponsored by the government of Burkina Faso, signed, President Ibrahim Traoré. Mike closed his eyes. The world had once called him a monster. But now, a boy across the ocean saw him as a mentor, a teacher, a symbol of something worth becoming. And that was enough. The end, maybe for now. But in that studio, in that school, in that dusty village, in that moment under the stars, something shifted. A fighter became a messenger. A president became a poet. And a child gave the world back its heart. If you cried, it's okay. Mike did too. And if this story moved you, let it sit with you. Let it remind you that change doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it comes in a whisper, in a picture drawn with crayons, in a boy who doesn't want to fight anymore, in a man who finally laid his armor down. Because even the toughest fighters need someone to believe in them. And sometimes believing in someone heals everything.